minutes of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to the Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on October 19th, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of the state of the Pacific salmon. For those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. With the latest Zoom version, you may now speak in the language of your choice without the need to select the corresponding language channel. You will also notice that the platform's raised hand feature is now in a more easily accessed location on the main toolbar should you wish to speak or alert the chair. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Today we have from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Carl Gerber, Research Scientist, Pacific Region. We have John Holmes, Division Manager, Stock Assessment and Research Division. We have Simon Jones, Research Scientist, Pacific Region. We have Christy Miller-Saunders, Research Scientist, Pacific Region. We have Jay Parsons, Director, Aquaculture, Biotechnology and Aquatic Animal Health Science Branch. We have Rebecca Reed, Regional Director General, Pacific Region, and Andrew Thompson, Regional Director, Science, Pacific Region. We will now proceed with opening remarks. Ms. Reed, you may begin with introductions, and then, of course, I believe we're going to hear from at least one other person from the department or so on. So over to you when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. So yes, I'm Rebecca Reed. I'm the Regional Director General for DFO Pacific Region. My colleagues and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee on behalf of Fisheries and Oceans Canada.
To begin with, we would like to thank you for focusing on this extremely important issue.
Our aim today is to provide you with as much information as possible to support your deliberations. En particulier, nous sommes heureux.
In particular, we are pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the steps taken by the department to conserve and replenish the populations of salmon in the Pacific.
Over the next 10 minutes, I will introduce you to the witnesses and describe their areas of expertise. I will invite Dr. Christy Miller-Saunders to provide a more in-depth description of her field of research, and then I will close with some final remarks. Andrew Thompson, whom many of you have met before, has been recently appointed as the Regional Director of Science. Prior to that, he was Regional Director of Fisheries Management for over 6 years and has held other management positions, including Director of Aquaculture Management. Dr. Jay Parsons, Director, Aquaculture, Biotechnology and Aquatic Animal Health Science Branch. Dr. Parsons has worked for over 30 years in the field of aquaculture, including both research and aquaculture management. Dr. John Holmes, Division Manager, Stock Assessment and Research Division. Dr. Holmes is currently responsible for stock assessment, surveys, activities, and advice on all marine finfish, invertebrates, and Pacific salmon. Dr. Kyle Garber, Research Scientist, Aquatic Diagnostics, Genomics, and Technology Division. Dr. Garber's research focuses on identifying and characterizing finfish viruses to understand transmission and pathogenic potential. Dr. Simon Jones, Research Scientist with Aquatic Diagnostics, Genomics, and Technology Division. Dr. Jones's research focuses on diseases in wild and farm salmonids. And Dr. Christy Miller-Saunders, Section Head, Salmon Genetics. Dr. Miller-Saunders' research focuses on molecular biology, genetics and genomics, ecology, and fish health. At this point, I will turn to Dr. Miller-Saunders to provide some remarks before I offer concluding comments. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you. My name is Dr. Christy Miller-Saunders. I hold a PhD from Stanford University and have been a research scientist with DFO since 1994. My areas of specialty include molecular biology, genetics and genomics, ecology, and fish health. I have worked on salmon for all of my career at DFO and issues surrounding salmon health and salmon declines for the past 20 years, with at least 75 of the 140 publications from my program focused on fish stress and disease. I co-developed the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative with Dr. Brian Riddle in 2012 in response to the clear data gaps on infectious disease discussed in the Cohen inquiry. The SSHI is a large multi-million-dollar project that sought to bring clarity to the role of infectious disease as a factor in salmon declines and to reveal pathogens undermining the survival of salmon in British Columbia. With a focus on all salmon in BC, wild, enhanced, and aquaculture, the SSHI assessed over 30,000 salmon for over 50 viruses, bacteria, and parasites associated with diseases in salmon worldwide. Technological advances in disease monitoring and diagnostics within the SSHI provided a new foundation for studying complex disease processes in live sampled fish, including a high-throughput molecular infectious agent monitoring system, an innovative approach to the resolution of novel viruses and viral disease, and to visualize viruses in tissue, and a holistic tool called Salmon Fit Chips that can resolve specific stressor and disease states in salmon using only a small gill clip. The funded SSHI program was completed at the end of March in 2021. The SSHI has resolved a clearer picture on the role of pathogens and declining survival of our wild BC salmon. Key highlights include discovery of over a dozen previously uncharacterized viruses infecting salmon in aquaculture, hatchery, and wild settings. No detection of several viruses of regulatory concern, corroborating evidence by the CFIA that these agents are not found in British Columbia. Identification of several agents with higher probabilities of transmission and disease under high water temperatures, suggesting that disease risk may continue to worsen as the climate warms. Discover piscine orthoreovirus in PC cultured and wild salmon, the first documented farm-level observation of heart and skeletal muscle inflammation in farmed Atlantic salmon, and a different but related PRV-associated disease in farmed BC Chinook salmon. In juvenile salmon, using infectious data spanning a decade, and traditional stock assessment modeling approaches, several infective agents have been resolved that show associations with annual variants in marine survival of Chinook, coho, and sockeye salmon. This represents the most comprehensive analysis of population-level impacts of infection on naturally migrating wild salmon. 2 of the 6 agents with consistent associations between species also shows connections with farm-mediated transmission, informing the risk to wild salmon posed by open net farming. The most notable agents include PRV, or piscine orthoreovirus, associated with annual variances in survival and low-weight Chinook and coho salmon, with highest incidence of infection within 30 kilometers of salmon farms. Phylogenetic studies show that PRV has been repeatedly exchanged between wild and farmed and wild salmon in British Columbia. The bacterium Tenacibaculum maritimum, responsible for significant mortality on salmon farms, is strongly associated with annual variance in survival and low-weight sockeye, Chinook, and coho. For sockeye, the highest incidence of infection is in fish sampled near farms in the Discovery Islands. The small skin parasite Ichthyopterius multifilius that infects salmon in fresh water shows a strong carryover effect on survival and low weight of sockeye, Chinook, and coho salmon in the ocean that may indicate years in which poor condition fish are entering the ocean. A newly discovered Pacific salmon nidovirus related to mammalian respiratory coronaviruses infects the respiratory gill tissue of salmon released from some federal hatcheries. We see preliminary associations with survival in Chinook and coho. A virtual international workshop was held at the end of March to provide expert advice on next steps for the program, which will include disease challenge studies and understudied agents if facilities and funding can be sourced. Our program is now moving to apply salmon fit chips to reveal the role of cumulative stressors on salmon survival. This tool can reveal if a salmon is undergoing salinity stress, low oxygen stress, or thermal stress, and if they're experiencing a viral disease. It can also predict whether a salmon is likely to die within 72 hours and the cumulative level of stress that they carry, which is predictive of lower survival over longer time frames. By applying this tool, we can assess the role of climate-driven changes on salmon health and identify environments and years in which salmon are most compromised. Importantly, it is our goal to use this tool to identify the stressors that, if mediated, could increase survival and productivity of our wild salmon. The success of this program has led to demand for the technology to understand similar issues in salmon worldwide, including Norway, the Netherlands, and the US. We're also working closely with many First Nations in BC and transferring some of the tools to the first Indigenous-led genomics laboratory in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
As you know, the main mandate of DFO is to manage fisheries in Canada and to protect our waters.
With that mandate, the protection, conservation, and restoration of wild Pacific salmon is a key priority. Pacific salmon are under threat, and the challenges facing them are numerous and multifaceted. Unforeseen events such as Big Bar landslide have further heightened the risk facing these populations. The department has taken significant action guided by Canada's wild salmon policy and its corresponding implementation plan, as well as the 75 recommendations from the Cohen Commission. With respect to marine finfish aquaculture, the department continues to rely on the best available science and a robust regulatory system to manage potential risks to wild fish stocks and ecosystems. We have made a number of strategic investments, including $142 million with the province of BC for the BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, $5 million to support the work of the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and $15 million to implement the Pacific Salmon Treaty's new commitments for stock assessment, quota wire tagging, and catch monitoring. The Minister's supplementary letter sets out a commitment to bring forward a long-term Pacific salmon strategy and to deliver on the government's commitment to conserve and protect wild Pacific salmon and their habitats and ecosystem. Budget 2021 identified $647 million over 5 years to support this work. Over the coming months, we will be actively supporting the Minister in shaping and delivering on this initiative, including close collaboration with our many partners working on the front lines of salmon conservation. Nous vous remercions de...
Thank you for your attention. Your questions will be welcomed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure everybody is anxious to get to the questions. So we'll start off with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off with Ms. Miller, if I could, please. Ms. Miller, you last appeared before this committee in November of 2016, and in that appearance you stated, if I can quote, "In my view, it is difficult to convince a skeptical public that we are doing everything we can to conduct robust, transparent, evidence-based risk assessments on aquaculture wild interactions if we do not maintain independence from industry," end quote. Since 2016, in your view, has DFO's independence from industry changed?
Well, I am supposed to be sticking to the science, but in short, no.
Okay, thank you. In March 2020, the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat released its report on the nine populations that COSAWIC has designated as threatened or endangered. The CSAS report stated that all sources of harm should be reduced to the minimum extent possible in order to provide the best chance of survival of threatened or endangered wild salmon stocks. In your view, are viruses from fish farms such as PRV a source of harm that should be reduced to the maximum extent possible?
Well, viruses are a particular concern because of their capacity for rapid evolution. So in farm salmon, viruses have a constant supply of a new host to infect. So there's no negative fitness consequence if a virus evolves to become more virulent, which is a different situation for wild salmon where densities are not as high. So we do have to worry about having large captured populations of fish and the potential for rapid evolution, which has been demonstrated in many parts of the world, including with PRV in Norway. So in the SSHI, we've amassed a strong evidence that PRV is a risk to wild salmon, particularly in Chinook and coho salmon, and that risk does need to be managed. I can go into details on what our evidence are if you are interested.
Okay, I'll try and get through some more questions, but if you've got further detail to add to provide to the committee, I would ask you to do that in writing afterwards. In your view, are sea lice a common source of harm or a source of harm that should be reduced to the maximum extent possible?
Well, sea lice is not my area. The SSHI didn't look at sea lice, so I can't respond from a place of being an expert in sea lice. I can say that it does concern me with increasing resistance in the drug slice, that impacts of treatments like the hydrolyser, which employs a strong stream of water on fish to dislodge sea lice. Creates a lot of stress on fish, and I do know something about stress, and I'm concerned that if that kind of tack to control sea lice were to take place, that the stressed fish, the fish that would come out of those kind of treatments, may be more vulnerable to infection and disease. So it's plausible that treatment could be actually elevate risk to wild salmon.
Okay, thank you. In your view, the bacterium or bacteria, or pardon me, in your view, are bacteria from fish farms such as Tenacibaculum or mouth rot a source of harm that should be reduced to the maximum extent possible?
Well, there were two agents in the SSHI that really stood out in terms of risks of transmission from salmon farms, and Tenacibaculum was one of them. Tenacibaculum is also the most consistently impactful agent in our population level models, showing impacts across all three species. So it is certainly of concern. There is more work to do on this bacterium in understanding its disease-causing potential in all of the Pacific salmon species. We know on farmed Atlantic salmon that it causes the disease mouth rot. And can be quite problematic on farms. In Pacific salmon and other species of fish, it causes a different disease called Tenacibaculosis. And there haven't been a lot of studies done on wild Pacific salmon with that bacterium, but certainly our data do suggest that we need to be very precautionary in our approach with this bacterium.
Okay, thank you. And really quickly, the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative was started in 2012, I believe, by the Conservative government after the Cohen Commission. I believe that initiative has stopped due to lack of resources. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, the program was developed to be run in phases, so it wasn't stopped because of lack of resources. It simply has run through the course of phase 2B, which was one of the planned phases. The next phase was supposed to be phase 3, where we were going to do basically disease challenge studies on the understudied agents that came out as to be the most impactful from phase 2B. And so we have to source new funding, and we have to source facilities to do those research challenges. And it's not certain that the Pacific Salmon Foundation or Genome BC would necessarily be involved. So we need to find new partners. So it's not necessarily dead. It just means that we have to kind of start over again and make a new program.
Okay, thank you. And really quickly again, were the 9 risk assessments used to inform the Discovery Islands decision correct in their conclusions that those 9 pathogens pose less than minimal risk to wild Pacific salmon?
Sorry, Mr. Arnold, you're gone over your time. We'll have to hopefully get that answer along the way. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do appreciate the opportunity to speak with the department. So many questions. I too will.
You're muted, Ken. Mr. Hardy, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, I'm not now. Must have flipped back. I think I hit the space bar by accident. Dr. Miller-Saunders, the pathogens that you've identified, and it seems that there are more ones that haven't been under common discussion, at least here at this committee. Now that they're in the population of wild salmon, if we were to lift all of the open net aquaculture out of the ocean now, would those pathogens still represent a huge ongoing risk to our wild populations?
Well, first of all, I have to be clear that not all pathogens that are coming out of our program are a risk of transmission from farm salmon. So if we look at the 6 most impactful from our models of the agents, 2 of them show a risk of transmission from salmon farms. And so you're not going to remove the risk of all infection, most of which is natural and endemic, by removing salmon farms. However, you may considerably reduce the risks of 2 of the agents that we find to be most impactful across species.
Okay, so with the identification of these new pathogens, I wouldn't want you to speculate, but it would seem that something has changed, obviously, if they didn't exist before, if they are new, if they were introduced or, again, naturally occurring. I guess the key question here is, though, the background of all of these pathogens being present in our wild salmon population, can we do anything about that, or are we simply going to have to watch the inevitable decline of our population because these pathogens are present and they'll keep circulating among our stocks?
Well, one of the reasons that we expect that pathogens may be more impactful today than they were in the past is not only the potential for interactions with cultured fish, and that could be our hatchery fish and aquaculture, but also the shift in the climate. And the relationship between pathogens and disease depends upon the susceptibility of the host, as well as the environmental conditions that are experienced. And so when you have salmon that are swimming through areas of very high temperature, that are experiencing low oxygen, that are that are experiencing lower food availability, they will be more vulnerable to picking up infections and to becoming diseased. And so it's not simply cultured fish, it's the combination of environmental change and cultured fish that may be, that should be considered when we're looking at disease-causing potential and the potential of disease to undermine survival of our wild salmon.
So are there mediation strategies that can help offset what you've noticed so far to the point where we can constructively look at the rebuilding of salmon stocks?
Well, I named 3 agents in my first outline that are associated with cultured fish, and that and dealing. As managers, what we're able to do is deal with the anthropogenic activities that we can control. Obviously, one of those is control of cultured fish. We can control how many hatchery fish we release. We can control the health and condition of those releases. We can control where and when farms are occurring and under what regulations. But there's also good evidence that that both the freshwater environment and the pathogens that are coming out in salmon from freshwater can be important pathogens in the marine environment. And there is mounting evidence in our program that areas of the coast that have more industrialization activities may be areas where salmon are undergoing the highest levels of infection. So I think that we need to be focusing not only on what we can control anthropogenically, but also identifying the critical areas along the coast where salmon are most infected and most stressed, and then focus our activities on remediating the stress in those habitats.
And focusing on that, will that make enough of a difference to save wild salmon stocks? That's kind of the key question.
Well, I do believe it will. Our early application of fit chips in sockeye salmon is showing a very high level of thermal stress occurring in the northern Strait of Georgia, right before salmon have to migrate through the Discovery Islands and Johnson Strait Passage. So those salmon are starting already compromised before they move into a quite challenging area, not only because of the currents, but also because of the farms. So the siting of farms in that area, may be detrimental, more because they're hitting those farms right after they have left a very stressful area because of climate change. So we need to be really careful about how we think about the kinds of industrialization activities that we do and where we do them, and try to remove those from the critical early rearing environments from salmon.
Do we have...
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. It's only about 10 seconds left, not much time for a question or an answer. So we'll go now and welcome back Mr. Blanchet-Janka to committee, and you have the floor now for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question will be for Ms. Miller-Sanders. I just would like to know whether, in your opinion, what the impacts are of the viruses on biodiversity.
Are you referring to biodiversity in salmon?
Yes.
The impacts of the virus. Well, okay, so we have discovered at least 12 new viruses infecting salmon, and I can't tell you a lot about the impacts of those viruses yet, because they are really just only under study. But viruses do carry the potential to cause population level effects. The fortunate thing here in BC is that there are not the only reportable virus that we have here, which has been shown to cause devastating effects at a population level is IHN virus, and that is an endemic virus here on our coast. PRV is also occurring in our farmed and wild salmon. Whether they have caused changes in diversity or genetic diversity, no one has ever actually studied that. So I actually can't really answer that question.
I just want to understand clearly. Do you think that this has an impact on the environment more broadly, the salmon and other species as well?
Is that viruses have an impact on salmon and other species as well?
Yes. So viruses on biodiversity in general.
Well, you know, there are quite a few viruses that can infect multiple different species. Some viruses are very specific to a given species. We have a Pacific salmon parvovirus that we only find in sockeye salmon, for example. And then there are other viruses like erythrocytic necrosis virus that that can be found across salmon and herring and other species, and that we know can cause high levels of mortality in herring. And so, you know, yes, there is evidence that you can have, you know, epidemics occur because of viral infection. The best evidence is in herring because we can see mass die-offs in herring. But whether viruses themselves have caused enough mortality to diminish the biodiversity of salmon, I, again, can't answer that question.
Thank you for that clarification. Ms. Miller-Saunders, you talked about Norway and studies there. Do you think that studies taking place outside Canada can be used in Canada?
Well, in fact, we're a little bit ahead of Norway when it comes to our studies of wild salmon in British Columbia, which is why we're starting to use some of the technologies we've developed here on Norwegian wild salmon. What we do know from studies in Norway that there really is little doubt that salmon farming has negatively impacted the wild salmon in the country. And the numbers of wild salmon in most parts of the world where farming is coexisting with natural wild populations has generally been negative on the abundance and biodiversity of those species. So we are in a much different situation in Canada where we still do have abundant wild stocks and we have a diversity of species, but this is exactly why we need to carefully manage to ensure that some of the same impacts that have been seen in other parts of the world don't happen here.
Thank you. Have you read studies from outside Canada about conservation of resources and pathology of viruses on salmon, Pacific salmon in particular?
Yes, of course I have. And Pacific salmon is, I mean, other than rainbow trout, is not common in other parts of the world where farming takes place. However, Pacific salmon is farmed in Chile. They're not endemic to Chile, but they are farmed in Chile. And interestingly enough, if you look at the salmon farming industry in Chile, where Atlantic salmon were moved over to Chile from Norway and other parts of Europe, and Pacific salmon were moved over to Chile mostly from Washington State, that along with those movements have been of the vast majority of infective agents that occur in the countries of origin where those fish came from. So we've shown in our latest PRV study that, in fact, that PRV has been introduced to Chile both from North America as well as from the Northern Atlantic. So it's you know, those movements to start those industries have resulted in the movements of infective agents along with the fish.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you much. How much time do I still have, Mr. Chairman?
ask a question or get an answer. So we'll get back to you again, I'm sure. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to begin by highlighting a Globe and Mail article from October 2020. In it, Dr. Miller Saunders, you say that you were told by your managers that your statements are your opinion and not those of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So I guess my first question is to Ms. Reid and Mr. Parsons. Can you assure us that Dr. Miller Saunders is free to speak today without any repercussions from the department?
Thank you, Mr. John. So what we've said to each of the witnesses is that we're asking them to speak to their area of expertise, and they are absolutely free to do so within that area of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Miller Saunders, I'd like to get a better understanding of the process, what happens when scientific research reveals the impact of salmon farms on wild salmon. For example, when you were asked in 2012 by Creative Salmon to look into why their salmon were dying, what was the department's response to your findings, and were you free to publish them?
Back in 2012, I undertook a study with a Chinook farming aquaculture company that was looking at whether jaundice anemia as a disease that was causing overwinter mortality on farms for over a decade was caused by environmental factors or by a virus. All of the work, the genomics work, the pathology work, and the epidemiological work all pointed to the activity of a virus. And when we employed molecular tools to look at all the known viruses and identified that PRV was heavily loaded in the farm that was undergoing the disease and not found in any kind of abundance in the other farm, the co-authors of the study, which were both industry vets, were not happy with the finding and did not want the finding to be included in the paper. And no, I have not been able to publish that paper to date.
Is there a reason why?
Because I have to have agreement from the industry vets that the interpretation is what we all can agree on.
Ms. Reid, when Dr. Miller Saunders reported to senior management last October that the bacteria widespread in salmon farms causing mouth rot is accumulating outside the salmon farms in the Discovery Islands, infecting sockeye and causing a negative population impact, I see from an ATIP that was sent to me that salmon farmers were briefed. I guess my question is, was the minister also briefed on this as she was in consultation with the 7 First Nations of the Discovery Islands? And would this have been important to share with the local First Nations?
So thank you, Mr. Johns. So just with regards to the information sharing within the department, we certainly would share information of that nature for context and for general awareness. With regards to the consultation process that went on with First Nations, I wasn't actually in the room with them, so I can't speak specifically to that. If you wish, I think Dr. Parsons could speak more specifically to some of those conversations.
Thank you. The specific point about Tenassi baculum was not brought up as part of the technical briefings that we had with the First Nations. Their primary interest in the briefings that we did provide really revolved around the 9 risk assessments that have been completed and published.
Sorry, was the minister briefed?
I wasn't involved in any of the briefings with the minister or with the minister's consultations with the First Nations.
Can anyone confirm if the minister was briefed on this?
So what I can confirm, Mr. Johns, is that the issue was definitely raised to the office, and that's as far as I could say.
Okay, in your view, this is back to Dr. Miller Saunders. In your view, are bacteria from fish farms such as mouth rot a source of harm that should be reduced to the maximum extent possible? And maybe you can speak about what is the emerging research on the potential for mouth rot from fish farms to have population level effects on wild Pacific salmon?
Well, it's tenacibaculum is the agent. Mouth rot is a disease that that the agent causes in Atlantic salmon. So it's not mouth rot that has the impact. But as I said before, tenacibaculum was coming out in our models as being one of the most consistently associated with population level impacts. But moreover, in sockeye salmon, we found that the highest incidence of infection was in fish migrating past farms in the Discovery Islands. And we then employed spatial and epidemiological models and fit the data from migrating sockeye salmon to identify whether farms in Discovery Islands were a source or the dominant source of tenacibaculum infection along the Fraser River sockeye salmon migration route. We not only did the models confirm that, the best fitted models confirmed that the highest source of tenacibaculum was around the Discovery Island farms. We were also able to show that that in the water column, that tenacibaculum was one of the agents most strongly concentrated around active farms compared to fallow farms. So there was a lot of tenacibaculum in the water column. Further, we looked at whether or not treatment of mouth rot was a correlated factor with the potential transmission into wild fish. We did not find that there was any effective treatment, that simply a farm being stocked with fish was enough to create a risk to wild migrating salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Jans. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be asking my questions of Ms. Miller-Saunders. My question for you is, do you believe the information that you are providing through the SSHI is informing policy today for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
I do believe that the information is provided to managers, certainly to managers in direct line of authority from me. Whether the information that I provide is actually going to the resource managers is not something I'm aware of,
Okay.
because I don't handle those briefings.
No, that's understood. I'll let the folks at the table that might be able to answer that in a bit. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about your research. Is the work that you've worked on with Dr. Riddell, has it been published anywhere? Has it been peer reviewed? Anything like that?
I don't know which research you're talking about, but we have published 50 papers from the SSHI in the last 6 years.
And it's consistent with international findings, wherever else there's fish farms and wherever else there's similar types of species. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Our PRV papers have been published with the same vets that have originally described HSMI in Norway. One of our lead vets is a very predominant pathologist out of Europe.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the comment that you made about the nidovirus, or if I'm pronouncing that correctly, insofar as hatcheries. And you said it's respiratory gill tissue it's found in the respiratory gill tissue of salmon released from some federal hatcheries. And these would not be hatcheries, of course, that would be providing Atlantic salmon to the farms. These would be hatcheries that are producing Pacific salmon, correct?
That's correct. These are enhancement hatcheries.
All enhancement hatcheries? None of it's in the community-based hatcheries, to your knowledge yet, or have you been able to look?
We have not looked a lot at community-based hatcheries. We've looked at some, but we have seen that particular virus coming out of hatcheries on the east coast of Vancouver Island, the west coast of Vancouver Island, and in the Fraser River.
And is there any reason for you to believe that it hasn't always been there? Is it coming in through the brood stock, or is it something that's being picked up in the hatchery scenario?
Those are really good questions. We have picked up Pacific salmon nidovirus in farm Chinook salmon, so we know it's on Pacific salmon farms. We also have picked it up in the odd returning adult wild fish. So it is out there. The thing that's really different about that particular one is that we rarely detect it in wild salmon coming out of fresh water. So where we're seeing it has been in hatcheries.
So how would you know that if the hatchery fish aren't completely marked? How do you differentiate an unmarked hatchery Chinook from a marked, or from an unmarked wild Chinook in the same system?
Well, for one thing, we actually get fish from the hatcheries. So we take samples of fish before they've released them. And then after that, you're absolutely right. We are only able to use the adipose fin clip to identify it's a hatchery fish or not.
Would it be helpful to your research if we actually marked all Chinook and coho?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good for me to know. I'm going to go back over to the department officials. Your initial question I asked, insofar as this work informing policy, could anybody speak to what level this research has been informing policy on the West Coast?
So I think I'll ask Dr. Parsons to take a start at this, and then we can go from there. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. I'll start off with a response and speak to you from the perspective of the science branch. I mean, as you know, DFO is a science-based department, and it's the science sector within DFO that's responsible for producing science advice that contributes to the department's mandate. And certainly when research findings are published, those are certainly considered as part of our adaptive management approach. But more fulsomely, we have a very strong, formal, robust peer review process that we call the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, or CSAS, that we use to provide formal science advice to DFO resource managers. And that process involves looking at the breadth of the scientific literature that's available. So not only the science that we do in the department, but all available science. We conduct a synthesis of that information, and then that information is peer reviewed through a process where we bring both internal and external experts together to review that information, provide advice. That advice is then communicated to the DFO managers, and that advice is also published on our website. So it's a robust, transparent process to formalize the advice and provide it to aquaculture management as part of their decision-making process.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Calkins.
Thank you,
We'll
Chair.
now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Miss Reid. Can DFO assure the future of salmon, primarily the commercial salmon, based on what DFO has did in the past?
So thank you very much for that question. I think in my open remarks, I talked about the significant concerns we have around salmon and their future state. And part of the minister's commitment to deliver Pacific salmon strategy really speaks to the need for change in how we approach salmon management and a number of
okay, then, Ms. Reid, based on that, because I take it then in your answer that if we continue to do as we've done in the past, there's no assurance that there will be any type of salmon fishery in the future, whether recreational or commercial. Am I correct?
Well, so we are seeing very significant declines in salmon and have significant concerns about that.
Yes. So then what has to change?
Well, so the salmon...
Well, let's start with one. And recently our government has allocated over $600 million to begin addressing this issue in the budget. So what advice would you give this committee should be the priority to focus on that would lead to a better future for the salmon fishery on the West Coast? And I'm talking about the natural fishery first.
Thank you. So I would recommend 4 key strategies. The first would be to focus investments in habitat conservation and restoration type activities. Second, I would recommend strategic enhancement to support stocks of concern and where possible to support harvest where appropriate. I think there's a need for some significant harvest sector transformations to focus on selective fishing to avoid stocks of concern. And finally,
continue.
And finally, we need to focus on integration and collaboration to ensure that our governance structures, both within and outside the department, are functioning at the optimal capacity.
Okay, thank you. Habitat, we know. I mean, it's been consistent. If there's one common area, it's habitat. Could you expand on your strategic? And I made notes, but your second one strategic investments. Explain.
So for my second one was around salmon enhancement. And so there's a couple of areas. For example, we don't have any major hatchery facilities sort of above the big bar slide along the Fraser River. And so that's a gap that's been in place, well, forever, made worse by the slide and the pressure on those stocks. So that would be an example of an important investment to be made to protect those returning stocks.
Okay, I want to go because earlier in a meeting we had a fisher by the name of Captain Hawkness. And this goes to the comment you made. You have to reevaluate the harvesting, the impact of harvesting. And correct me if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly, but you referenced, so I picked out of that, there has to be a serious discussion on the commercial fishing effort on the West Coast as it relates to salmon. Am I correct? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, so my comment was really intended to say that because salmon swim together, the weak ones and the strong ones, we need to find ways to selectively harvest to avoid harm to those particular stocks of concern. And so unfortunately, they sort of all look alike when they're swimming together. Some are of concern and some are stronger. And so how do we make sure that we selectively harvest the stocks that can withstand that fishing pressure?
Is that technology or know-how available? Can a commercial fisher, is that knowledge available to a commercial fisher to selectively fish?
Well, so there's a number of techniques that you can do to encourage selective harvesting. So it's not just equipment, but it's area and time can allow for selective harvest as well, but also gear types, locations, those types of things. So there's a number of different techniques to encourage the selective harvest of the stocks that can withstand the pressure of harvest.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. You got 6 seconds left, so it's hardly time to ask a question or get an answer. We'll go now to Mr. Blanchet-Janka again for 2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Blanchet-Janka.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I seem to have had a problem with my connection. I want to come back to Ms. Miller-Saunders with my question. You talked about the impact of climate change on Pacific salmon. We know that the problems relating to climate change will get worse over time. So if there was an urgent measure we could take, what would that be?
Well, one of the things that we need to better understand is where are the bottlenecks? Where are the areas along the coast and in the rivers where climate change is having its greatest effect? We know in freshwater systems when we have premature mortality of returning adult salmon, that where they're likely to die are the areas where they're experiencing prolonged periods of time of high thermal stress. There are sometimes conditions where in some systems where cooler water can be introduced. Those are obviously more common where there's dams, which fortunately we don't have as many of those here as they do as on the Columbia. But we need to do what we can control, which for one thing is if we're going to rely on hatcheries, we need to produce the most robust fish that we can. So we know that the condition of fish coming out of fresh water is in one part a predictor of how well they're going to perform in the marine environment when they are exposed to different stressors. So if we can produce optimally healthy fish that are ready for that transition to salt water and have as few infections as possible, we will increase the probability that those fish will actually survive long enough to either be prey for killer whales in the case of Chinook salmon or be available for fisheries. But certainly climate change affects more than just temperature. It affects the prey availability. It affects the predators, et cetera. So it is a larger issue than that. But in my view, identifying the areas of the coast, and this is something that I do believe our FIT chips is going to be really strong for, identifying where are the stressor bottlenecks associated with climate change, and that will allow us to determine what are the mitigative actions in different parts of the coast that we could possibly take.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman? Will I have time to ask a question of another witness to hear what they might say about the urgent measures that we could take to deal with climate change in the Pacific region?
Questions. The time is up for now. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Last week, the BC Court of Appeal once again affirmed that the Five Nations, Nuu-chah-nulth Nations Aboriginal right is a high priority in their court case. Will the department, and this is to Ms. Reid, recognize the priority of the nation's right and its importance to the economic and social well-being of their fishing communities and our West Coast economy, instead of continuing to fight the five Nuu-chah-nulth Nations in court?
I think it is.
Sorry, you're not on mute, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We do recognize the court-defined right by those Five Nations. Yes, we do.
So recognizing the importance of last week's BC Court of Appeal decision, what actions will the department be taking for the 2021 fishing season to increase the allocations of Chinook, coho, and other species in keeping with the priority of the Five Nations Aboriginal right and a generous approach to Chinook and coho specifically? And what recommendations will you be bringing to the minister?
So we are still reviewing the court decision, of course, as you know, and we are also undergoing negotiations with the Five Nations from a reconciliation perspective. They do have a fishery management plan in place now for their rights-based fishery.
So even in times of low returns, do you agree that if any fishing takes place, the First Nations Aboriginal rights fisheries have priority after conservation? And also, do you agree that this priority includes the rights-based economic fisheries of the five Nuu-chah-nulth Nations, as the courts have stated?
So the rights priority would follow conservation. There's FSC that needs to be taken into account and treaty rights, but yes, those are the priorities that we are managing.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jones, in 2018, you published an important paper that described the profound physiological impact of sea lice on young sockeye salmon. Do you think this information should have been included in DFO's assessment, whether salmon farms are a risk to Fraser sockeye salmon, given the sea lice outbreaks we seem to hear about every year now, suggesting the farmers are having trouble controlling sea lice?
Thank you very much for the question. The paper we published in 2019 was a continuation of work that we'd begun in 2013, where we first published on impacts of sea lice on sockeye salmon. Your question, I believe, referred to risk assessments, and we have not conducted a risk assessment per se on sea lice. However, published work such as the paper you described and others that we do publish serve as alternative sources of scientific advice that are provided into the department.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Mazur for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming out this afternoon. The committee has heard repeatedly that out-of-control pinniped populations are decimating juvenile Pacific salmon populations, and this is contributing to ongoing stock declines. Dr. Carl Walters stated that he had worked with the Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society to develop proposals for commercial and First Nations harvesting of seals and sea lions, aimed at reducing pinniped populations to salmon stock recoveries. The witness went on to say, and I quote, "Those proposals went into DFO 2 years ago, and the department has been sitting on them for over 2 years with one excuse after another for not taking any action. What is the status of the proposals submitted to DFO by the Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society?"
I'd like to take that question, Mr. Mazur. So in my previous capacity, I was the Regional Director of Fisheries Management, responsible for all fisheries management, including marine mammal management. The proposals that came in from Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society were assessing a new and emerging fisheries policy. That policy requires, it's the same as for every new and emerging fishery, it requires quite a significant amount of information to be provided by proponents in order that we can properly assess any potential impacts of a new fishery on not just on the target stock, but of course on the ecosystem impacts, the impacts that the fishery may have elsewhere. So we have been in conversations with Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society and others that have proposed these things to try to give a full picture so we can assess what the impacts might be of any potential pinniped harvest on not just the pinnipeds, obviously, but on all other stocks. As we all know, pinnipeds are a consumer of salmon. They're also a consumer of prey species of salmon. They are also consumers of fish that prey on salmon. And so there's a significant amount of ecosystem impacts that you'd have to fully understand and study for make a broad determination as to whether or not a fishery should proceed.
So basically, over the last 2 years, there's been no action taken out in the field or anything. It's still under study, as far as you're concerned.
No, we've been in conversation with the society as well as other proponents to try to fill in those information gaps. We've had our science branch colleagues have been out studying some of these potential impacts. We've convened 2 symposium of international researchers to try and fill in some of those information gaps as well, to again give the department and those who may be applying a full picture as to what the impacts of pinnipeds may be and what are the potential actions that should be taken.
Okay. Ms. Reid, my next question. On April 2021, a report prepared by BC salmon farmers provided an analysis of the economic impact in Surrey, BC of the decision by the federal government to close open net pen salmon farms in the Discovery Islands region. The report indicated that potentially more than 1,500 people province-wide could lose their jobs in the near term, and salmon farming companies would lose almost $200 million in ongoing annual revenue from salmon farming and processing. Did the DFO conduct its own socioeconomic analysis prior to taking that decision? And if so, can you explain what the analysis consisted of and who was consulted?
Thank you for the question. So I would say that the decision taken was around the risk evaluation and other considerations related to the transfer of fish into Discovery Islands. While there was some socioeconomic information collected, it was through our policy and economic analysis branch. But I wouldn't say there wasn't a study. It wasn't an extensive amount of work. We had some conversations in general with the industry about the size and value of the industry, but not related to this specific decision.
So, like, this is impacting 1,500 people province-wide and $200 million. Why was there no detailed transition plan to support the affected workers in the local communities?
Well, the decision was taken with respect to this particular location. It doesn't affect the rest of aquaculture across British Columbia, so it's for this particular location. The question put before the minister really was around, can these fish be transferred into this location or not? And that was really based on the factors that we consider around risk, health, and the elements of reconciliation.
Okay, thank
you, Mr. Major. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reid, I'll ask you to act as traffic cop here and sort of direct the questions as to whoever is in the best position to answer them. On an ongoing basis, from time to time, we see announcements of various programs that have to do with habitat restoration or anything that preserves or basically restores salmon stocks on the West Coast. Do you have any, or does anybody have any idea about how many of these programs exist right now or have existed within the last couple of years?
I'm sorry, just to clarify the question. So how many restoration type projects?
Well, restoration or any kind of program that has to do with restoring or preserving salmon stocks. Does anybody have a fix on the number of those programs?
Well, for sure. Would you like me to describe some of them?
Nope. No, I just need
Okay.
to know that somebody's got the list, because the next question that falls out of that is, are you comfortable that overall, if you look at the cumulative aspect of all of these programs, are they getting us anywhere? Is there coordination? Is there somebody looking at the ground that we're covering and identifying gaps where new programs could happen, or where there's duplication of effort that really is, we're spinning our wheels?
Thank you very much for that question. And so that is one of the key pillars of the Pacific Salmon Strategy and the funding that was provided. The idea being that we need to have a better coordinated, integrated approach to support the many different restoration programs that are going on right now. So the BC Shrift program, the Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, has actually funded programs to sort of start to create that priority list and priority setting exercise. But we do see the Pacific Salmon Strategy as creating the governance around restoration and stewardship from outside of the department, which will significantly improve the way we manage and plan.
So it's the Pacific Salmon Strategy creates, if you like, the framework, but has the framework been filled in? Are you satisfied, if it was your money, okay, that the department was, actually putting out there to these various projects, are you satisfied that we're getting maximum value for that money?
Well, I mean, the thing with restoration is that it's hugely expensive, and so are we putting the money in the best places? We have some. I mean, we work very hard to prioritize, work with stakeholders, with Indigenous groups to really ensure value for money. I think that there's a need for greater coordination between the stakeholders so that we can take the various sources of money and collectively put them to good use. So I think there are opportunities for improvement, yes.
When we were looking at the big bar slide, last year now, we were looking at the discussion came up about hatcheries, particularly hatcheries, further upstream from the slide, and there was really quite a bit of disagreement about the role that hatcheries should play and whether or not they're helpful or not in the grand scheme of things. Does the DFO have an overall strategy for hatcheries? And if so, can you describe it?
Yes, thank you. So the Salmonid Enhancement Program, which has been around for 40 years, has spent a significant amount of time looking at that question about when is enhancement good and when is it not good. And they have created guidelines to ensure that any enhancement activities sort of fall within the acceptable practices so that you can produce more fish, but you're not endangering the genetic diversity or impacting on the stocks of concern. And so I think it is a really important question to ask. The Salmonid Enhancement Program has done a lot of work on it, and I think that there's still more work we can do to improve upon it.
Is there any, if you like, conclusions being drawn about, for instance, the size of hatcheries? Because certainly what we heard in the testimony around the big bar slide was that the great big operation might be the source of more harm than good, but that smaller community-based operations might be the way to go because they can be a little bit more specific to the location that you're trying to enhance.
I mean, right now what we have is a mix of large and small community-based hatcheries, and we have always supported that kind of dual model. Just because you have a big hatchery doesn't mean you're only producing one type of fish. There's a lot of flexibility within those facilities to create, different populations of fish which can be enhanced. In some cases, move to different locations as required. That's certainly what we're doing right now with the big bar because we don't have hatcheries in the places we need them. We're transporting, brood stock or eggs to other hatcheries and then relocating them back to where they go back to what we'd hope would be their natal stream. And so in that way, you can be strategic about those large hatcheries and not just rely on the smaller ones.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to each of the witnesses for your time this evening and your testimony. I'd like to start by asking Ms. Reed a couple of questions. What is the status of the Pacific Salmon Secretariat? Have plans been finalized for the creation of the Secretariat?
So you're referring to the one as part of the Pacific Salmon Strategy?
Yes.
So we have not, well, what we've done right now is we've created an internal team that we've staffed, and it's quite a small team at this point. But the idea would be subject to, going through the financial processes, Treasury Board submissions, those types of things. We would start to build out the Secretariat. We would also build on the external piece as well. But that's definitely, it's very early days at this point.
Do you have an estimated time as to how long that process will take to get it up and going?
Well, from an internal perspective, it'll be a matter of sort of, can we get the staff in place? And so, we do have a structure in place right now. I can imagine it will be quite a few months to get it fully staffed. From an external perspective, it'll take longer because we do need to consult with our partners, with Indigenous groups in a meaningful way to really talk to them about what the structure would look like and how they'd like to be involved. And so I could see that taking considerably longer to stand up.
Okay, and can you tell us what is the status of the Restoration Center of Expertise? And have the plans been finalized for the creation of it?
No, I would put that in the same category as we have a number of ideas and strategies that have been very recently accepted and announced. And now we need to do the work to really start to build them out.
Okay, do you know what external organization, the department in the Pacific consulted with, such as, as it relates to the Pacific Salmon Secretariat or the Restoration Center of Expertise?
Who did we consult on to build it? Well, so
to come up with a concept.
Okay, well, department has worked with its stakeholders, Indigenous groups for forever, and we have regular ongoing conversations about what's needed, what was required. The BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund has been very helpful to help us kind of set some priorities, but it really is at this point we start to reach out and build the right center based on what stakeholders, Indigenous groups say to us back, and so we need to collectively do it together.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Can you tell me clearly, who proposed these ideas for the Secretariat and the Center of Excellence, where it came from?
Well, it was, and I would say we developed the proposal within the department and sought approval for it.
Okay, so it came from within the department.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But informed externally as well.
Okay, well, for over a year, the committee has been studying the state of Pacific salmon, and we've heard from numerous Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations involved in trying to restore wild Pacific salmon. And we've been told that proven methods for restoring stocks are known and available. They're just not, they just need to be resourced, or they haven't been resourced properly to this point. It seems that the current government's funds in the federal budget will basically be reinventing the wheel that we know already exists. Wouldn't these new federal resources be better placed in support of actual actions restoring salmon stocks than creating more and new innovative structures?
Well, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, you need to be able to set priorities, and you need to do it in a way that kind of considers the views of your stakeholders, your partners, the Indigenous groups, and then you need to actually take action. We do have a number of restoration projects and programs on the grounds doing work right now. And so that's underway already. There's a number of examples. What we need to do is make sure we're using the money in the wisest way, that we get to those priorities. And so in that way, we do need to reach out and work with others to make sure that those priorities are set and understood and accepted.
So do you feel overall that the known solutions that are already out there, the known recommendations that are already out there, that there's enough being done on what we already know works? Do you feel that enough steps are being taken and enough resources being committed to the recommendations that are well known to everyone in the field? It's a matter of implementation. Do you feel the practical steps towards implementation to get results have been made so far?
Well, I think we need to be strategic in where we put our money, because there is not enough money in the world to, I think, to do every single restoration project that people may wish to see. The challenges are overwhelming and intense. And I mean, you've heard talk about the impacts of climate change on fresh water, on temperatures, on flows. Those are all very, very significant problems. And so can we make improvements? Absolutely. But can we fix everything? That's where you need to be strategic about what's the best bang for the buck.
Well,
Thank you,
for
Mr.
example,
Bragdon.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up with the question from MP Hardy and to a lesser extent MP Bragdon. And my question to Ms. Reid would be, why have past practices by DFO failed in restoring salmon, commercial salmon?
Well, there's a lot of challenges that salmon are facing. So there's any number of impacts to their survivability. It's not just harvest. There's climate change. There's impacts on habitat. There's they encounter any number of ways that cause their decline. And so
okay, but we've known that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, habitat. The impact of civilization on the habitat industrial, we've known that. We have known to those that accept the fact that the climate is changing, that the ocean is warming. We also understand, and from the testimony given by Dr. Miller, that a lot of the viruses, in fact, I was surprised when she said the majority are naturally occurring. So, you know, the impact of fish farming would appear minor on that side. So then I'll go to my next question, because it doesn't appear that it's one specific area of why have past practices failed. But then where are you going to? What's your advice, to use your words, strategic investment to ensure this substantive amount of money that has now been targeted towards this industry? Where strategically should it be placed?
So that's really what we want to do when we create the governance structures and the advisory processes in place, is to be strategic about where to spend the money. So it's not that all populations are in decline. We have examples of salmon populations improving. And
which one are those? Which one are those?
Well, some of the Chinooks populations are in good health, for example. There's a number of examples. But we have some very significant challenges that impact on some of those stocks. All right, so you've got climate change, you've got warming water condition, urbanization, you've got habitat development. You need to basically bring people together to set those priorities and start to work away at those problems.
But those people that you're going to bring together, you're the senior person in DFO on the West Coast. What's your recommendation to them going to be?
My recommendation is that we will achieve a lot more by working together in partnership, by setting priorities together, and by agreeing on what those broad outcomes that we want to accomplish.
And do you have a mindset on what the priority should be?
Well, I mean, I've given you sort of 4 categories of where we should make efforts. Habitat restoration, for sure. We need to do some harvest transformations. We need to make sure our governance pieces are
because to follow up on Mr. Hardy's point, which he was correct on, we do not want to be reinventing the wheel. And that's why my question was, do we know what has not worked in the past? Because if we're not really clear on that as a governance body, then that will impact where we're going to make these strategic investments. Because you're right, it's a large budget, but every budget is finite. So we do not want to reinvent the wheel on the areas where it had no successful results in the fisheries. So within that particular view, can you assure this committee that we're not going to be reinventing the wheel, that we're going to target and use the money wisely in your statements? And where would those key targeted areas be?
fully intend to use the money wisely. We are extremely pleased to be able to have this level of support to protect the wild Pacific salmon. It's an extremely exciting opportunity, and we take our responsibilities very seriously to deliver value for money and to ensure that as we set priorities, we're not reinventing the wheel. We are moving forward with what we know. We're leveraging what's already in place and available, and we're taking advantage of kind of what we know and looking for those opportunities to make a big difference. So there's lots of different places to work, and I think there's tons of conversations we need to have to really create the best plan.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Mr. Blanchet-Janka for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be for Ms. Reid. Do you feel, I hope that you feel comfortable speaking or asking someone else to respond. With respect to First Nations, we haven't heard much about their role regarding conservation of salmon. So what do you think their role can be in that?
Thank you for the question. So we do view the role of Indigenous people as absolutely critical to any plan strategy that we develop, and we have a number of governance processes already in place that will help leverage that work. For example, the Fraser Salmon Management Board, which was recently created for the Fraser River, where a large number of Indigenous groups are working together for the good of Pacific salmon. We do intend to work with Indigenous groups to talk to them about what sort of an advisory process they would see being effective and helpful to support the conversations we need to have about, where to put the money and how to set priorities. And so we view those conversations at a government-to-government level as critical to the success of this strategy.
Merci, Madame Reid.
Thank you, Ms. Reid. Very quickly, Ms. Miller-Saunders, could you just give us a quick word about what you think of the role of First Nations?
First Nations are critical because they are on the grounds and they have years and years of history in witnessing the changes that we are studying today. My program is working extensively with First Nations on the west coast of Vancouver Island as well as in the Broughton Archipelago, and hoping to utilize their history of knowledge to better understand where we need to focus our efforts in terms of understanding stressor and historic patterns in populations. So I think that from what I can see from a scientist's perspective, that there has been a lot of activity in the department to more fully integrate First Nations in the work that we do, both in the field and in the consultations in terms of the interpretation of the work. So I see it as a very positive move forward for the department and their relationship with First Nations.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet-Janka. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Miller-Saunders, we've heard a lot about cumulative effects here today on wild salmon, climate change, disease, pollutants. With so many things going on, can your program offer any insight into which factors are playing the biggest role and which could be mediated through some kind of intervention? You talked about your FitChip program. Can you elaborate a bit more on this work, and also what is needed to move forward with this work?
Sure. I really do believe that the FitChips will give us a new resolution that we've never had before. Previously we could go out and measure temperatures, we could go out and measure environmental conditions, and we could surmise that they may be impactful to salmon. The FitChips actually offer an opportunity to look at the salmon themselves and allow the genomic signatures of the salmon to speak for themselves. We can actually tell not that the salmon is experiencing thermal stress, not just they're in a high temperature area, but whether they're actually feeling the stress of the environment. The point of the FitChips is to better understand the interconnection between different kinds of stressors and diseases. And if you can understand whether they're cumulative, which means that they're additive, or they're synergistic, which means that they could be multiplicative, so that you have one stressor and you have another stressor, and they're 10 times more powerful when they're together. When you have that kind of information, you're able to say, what would happen if I just remove one of those? Because we can't remove all of the stressors, but if we can target the stressors we can mitigate, and we can understand how they interplay with each other, we can be better informed onto what strategies we can take to reverse the declines, to actually develop a measure to reduce or to increase survival substantially. Okay. The other thing that they allow us to do is identify the habitats that are most impactful in terms of stress. Where is the stress hotspot occurring? And then we can target our mitigative actions to those areas. And I know we've done a lot of work in freshwater systems, and I cannot emphasize enough that the early marine rearing environment, where many of our stocks spend up to a year, is also critical, and we need to be looking at what we can do there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the science of the increase of survival of hatchery fish in relation to that?
Of the increased survival of hatchery fish?
Yep.
Well, yeah. So one of the things that we have done is developed a means to measure different kinds of stress as well in hatcheries, and so the way that we culture fish, is fairly without habitat, essentially. And one of the issues that has been that has come up is that hatchery fish don't behave the same and they don't survive the same as a wild fish. And so if we can find ways of creating hatchery fish that have a very low level of stress and that behave more like a wild fish, we would potentially not only increase their potential for survival, but we would decrease the domestication effects of hatcheries. So the fit chip applications could identify the optimal window of timing that salmon are ready to enter the marine environment, so that we can identify the smolt window, so that when they enter the marine environment, they are able to deal with the change in salinity, which is a very stressful period of time. We can identify whether fish are experiencing a viral disease state, for example, in the hatchery, in a way that's non-invasive, that doesn't actually require death of the fish to sample it. And we can identify whether the practices that we use in hatcheries, are stressful on the fish. And if we start seeing indices of stress in the fish, we can mitigate those different activities to try to find the least stressful way that we can be growing salmon and releasing the healthiest and least stressed fish.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll go to Ms. Saunders again, Miller Saunders. Are you concerned that the finding of mouth rot of your team indicates a greater risk to wild salmon populations than DFO believed to be the case when the risk assessment for that pathogen was done?
Well, our finding is for Tenacibaculum. Mouth rot is the disease caused by Tenacibaculum in farms. The work that we did was after the CSAS process, so they did not have the same level of information available for them when they performed the CSAS. And I do think it is important, and as was said in every CSAS process, that as new information, as new scientific data arises, that they will reconsider the level of risk that they have determined in the CSAS. So I do fully expect that the new data coming out of our program, which not only suggests that there is a population level risk, and that's something that they weren't able to look at very holistically with empirical data in the CSAS process, because they simply didn't have multiple years of data to look at variations of each of those agents with salmon survival. We had that data. We were able to do that. That makes us quite unique in terms of the research programs on our coast. And so now that we know that there is a potential population level effect, they need to go back and look at their estimation of less than 1% impact on sockeye salmon.
Okay, thank you. Again, in your view, were the 9 risk assessments used to inform the Discovery Island decision correct in their conclusions that those 9 pathogens pose less than minimal risk to wild Pacific salmon?
Well, I was only personally involved in the PRV CSAS, and my colleague Andrew Baton was involved in the Tenacibaculum one, so I can't really speak to what went on in the room with all 9 of those. I can say that in the PRV CSAS, that they were very heavily reliant on the challenge studies that had been performed in DFO, and they were reluctant to consider one critical flaw that I flagged numerous times in the CSAS, which was those challenge studies used mortality and clinical signs of disease as the endpoint to be able to declare that PRV causes disease. Nowhere in the world has mortality been demonstrated in a PRV challenge, even in Norway. So why would we expect that mortality and clinical signs of disease should be present in a challenge in BC when it isn't present in Norwegian challenge studies? So challenge studies for PRV generally rely on the incidence of the pathological lesions that occur in the fish, and the early studies performed that a lot of the CSAS was based on were didn't do a lot of pathology in their analysis, and so I think that there was an error on the side of the uncertainty in that they felt more certain in the results of the challenge studies than they should have.
Okay, thank you. If the minister were to ask you if she can say with confidence today that fish farms in the Discovery Islands pose less than minimal risk to wild Pacific salmon, what would your advice to her be? Could she say with confidence that they pose less than minimal risk?
If you're talking about minimal risk to sockeye salmon, specifically in the Discovery Islands specifically, I would say she should give pause and not make that sort of declaration until we have fully ironed out the role of tenacibaculum in sockeye salmon declines.
Okay. Now, what is the science evidence that Pacific fish farms pose more than minimal risk to wild Pacific salmon?
Well, there are many different types of evidence. Certainly, one that wasn't explored in the CSAS was the sea lice, and Simon Jones talked about that briefly here. Certainly, there are challenges with resistance to the drug and the ability of the industry to keep the lice levels down. But in terms of the work that we've done, our evidence centers around two pathogens, PRV and tenacibaculum, but we're not done. And those are the ones that we've actually performed the models on to look at those risks. There very well may be others. One of the things that we are embarking on now is looking at environmental DNA, which is a way of looking at the concentration of infective agents in the water column, where we will actually be able to look at whether when farms are switching to a disease state, whether or not we can recognize the shift in the pathogen communities in the water column before that disease state causes significant mortality, which would be potentially a tool that the regulator could use to determine what kind of mitigative actions they could take before there's major loss or before there is more risk to wild salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I wanted to talk about the role of the province. One of our witnesses said something to the effect that the province of BC kind of vacated the field in certain areas, particularly when it came to habitat, and that we had one DFO officer in Kamloops trying to cover an amazing amount of territory. Ms. Reid, does that sound like something that you've heard along the way?
Well, I can't speak to the staffing levels in BC, but I think that we are always challenged to have enough habitat people on the grounds, given the significant territory they have to cover.
Well, I was the staffing level was the DFO person in Kamloops. And basically by themselves. I guess let's turn this on its head a little bit. What's the role of the province, particularly in the inland waters, that complements or is supposed to complement the work of the DFO?
So the province has responsibilities for freshwater, with the exception of the management of salmon. And so when you're looking at sort of agriculture, land type of decisions, water flow, water availability, those are areas where we do interact with the province of BC. they've got responsibilities for steelhead management, for example. So there's another interaction. And so we work with the province quite carefully and significantly from a habitat perspective. We also work with them in the marine environment, for example, for aquaculture for 10 years. And so that's kind of the interface between DFO and BC when it comes to land and water.
I don't want to put you terribly on the spot, but would it appear that the province is somewhat challenged to keep up its end of the work that needs to be done?
Well, I mean, the thing is, as I said, like there is a ton of work that has to be done. So we work collaboratively with BC. We have MOUs with them. We do our best to work together. So the BC TRIF, for example, is jointly funded. So Canada and BC together set those priorities and have, put money aside to support this. So those are, I think, examples of how we're working with them effectively.
Do they need help? Do they need more resources to basically provide a balance and properly complementary role to the DFO?
I think you'd have to ask them that, but I will say that we've had some great working relationships with them, including at the Big Bar site, where they have been there hand in hand helping us support that very significant project.
Again, over time and a number of studies where we talk about the health of fish stocks and particularly salmon, there has been a lot of discussion about activities that are going on, damage to riparian areas, residential and farming and industrial activities close to the banks of the Fraser River, etc. Is there dialogue between the DFO and the province when the province or some of the regional districts are looking at approving projects that could have a negative effect on salmon?
So we do have an MOU with the province. They have the riparian areas regulations that they put into place. They have responsibilities, as do we. The DFO has responsibility for authorizing habitat destruction. And so there is an interface between us where we need to work together. And so I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Is there a register of decisions that have been made that have resulted in habitat destruction?
A register? Actually, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly we have we document all the authorizations that we develop, and there is a database that collects that information. Yes.
Is there science on the impact of farming and particularly runoff from farms into, say, the Fraser River?
Absolutely. That's not my area of expertise, and I don't know if any of the panel members would view that, but there certainly have been a lot of studies. I've seen them myself.
But that would be something that the DFO would do or have a handle on.
Well, I mean, so there would be the interface where BC would be looking at farm runoff as an example. And sort of ways to mitigate it. We would be looking at sort of, the management of the fish, the impact on the habitat.
But there's no ongoing discussions between you and British Columbia so that we're all working.
Mr. Hardy, your time is up.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
No problem. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back and finish up on a conversation with Ms. Miller-Saunders. We were talking about the nidovirus in the hatcheries, and I'm just wondering, when did you first come to this discovery? Could you just let me know when did you first find out, or when has this been common knowledge that this virus has been present in some of our hatcheries?
About 2.5 years ago, we discovered the nidovirus, and we actually did a study where we looked at the distribution of the nidovirus in the Quinsam system, where we had samples both in the hatchery of wild fish and hatchery fish, and followed them through their migration out into the marine environment, and found that we first observed the nidovirus in wild fish after they'd come in contact with hatchery fish in the early marine environment. And then we saw a rapid decrease in the prevalence of the virus within the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks in the ocean, which could be either mortality or that they have cleared the virus. But at that particular point in time, when fish are so stressed in terms of trying to adjust to a new salinity environment, we are very interested in the potential for that being mortality.
Has that virus, do you think, always been there, and it's just we've just found it, or we just discovered it because we just looked for it, or like what's the baseline? Have we just established? Are we starting to establish a baseline, or like just give me a sense of where this whole thing is at, because it all seems relatively new to me, but I'm not sure that it's not always been there.
We are trying to establish a baseline. One of the ways that you can determine how long a virus may have been here is through sequencing. And so you look at the depth of the sequencing phylogeny for the virus, and we do know that there are different variants that are here. And so we do see some depth in the sequences, which do suggest that they've been here for a period of time. We are planning to carry out more sequencing and actually do a more robust phylogenetic analysis like we've done in PRV, which is a paper that is going to be coming out just in a couple of weeks. Where we can really more holistically look at the distribution across the province and in fish from Washington as well, because we do capture them along our coast, and try to get an idea of the depth of how long that virus may have been here and whether it likely evolved here on this coast.
Is there any suggestion that the movement from freshwater to saltwater might actually help the salmon when it comes to fighting the virus? Have we been able to collect any samples of any of the material or tissue in saltwater and compare it to what you found in juveniles or returning salmon in the freshwater?
So we have done a little bit of work with our fit chip, the early version of the fit chip a couple of years ago. And one of the things that we did see in the fish was a shift in the timing of osmoregulation. And so because the virus is infecting the gill, and we've been able to show that through viral imaging under the microscope, as well as our molecular work, we are concerned that the virus may disrupt the ability of fish to shift to becoming full smolts. And if it does disrupt their ability to smolt, it could disrupt their ability to adapt to the salinity environment. And that in and of itself is a huge detriment to survival. We've in all our work on fit chips data thus far, osmoregulatory failure and osmotic stress appear to be the most closely linked with survival of all the stressors that we've looked at, more so even than temperature.
So do you think that this virus is stress related? And do you think changing some of the rearing structures at a hatchery might actually help with this virus?
I think one thing that could potentially help is that's been happening for the last couple of years, in part by the department's work on PRV, and is getting the hatcheries to make sure that they're disinfecting their eggs as much as they can, to remove as much potential for viral transmission, vertical transmission from the females to the progeny. That certainly could decrease the level of the virus. I mean, one reason that a hatchery might carry a virus more than wild fish is just the high densities, high density environment, easy to spread. So if we don't really know a lot about vertical transmission for this particular virus, but that is a possibility if vertical transmission is a major source of transmission, that if they were to treat the eggs well, that they could reduce the incidence of the virus in the hatcheries.
To your knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. Gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you again, Chair. And I must say, I've been most impressed with the level of competency that we've seen before this committee coming from the DFO personnel that has appeared from the scientific community and the research community. And Dr. Miller-Saunders, I'm impressed with your passion for the science that you're doing here. And and the cause that's at hand. So I truly hope that the groups that come together utilize the great resource that has been on display before this committee, that is within the scientific branch of DFO, on a host of areas. We may not agree, we may not like the message, but it's clear from the witness that I've been listening to, you're bringing it in a non-biased stance, and I think that's extremely important. The decision makers simply have to listen. I would like for you to comment on, because we often hold Norway up as the gold standard on getting it right, and you made a comment earlier that we are ahead of Norway. I would like to know where we're ahead of Norway and which particular areas.
Well, one of the difficulties that Norway has in studying disease impacts in wild fish is that there's so few fish out there to be able to capture and study. And so they've been very limited to looking at return migrating adults that are returning to spawn, or juveniles that are going out, but they have really no ability to catch fish in the ocean because they're just not dense enough. And so my work with them has been to recapitulate some of the tracking studies that have been merged with FitChip and infectious agent monitoring, and then also looking as well at the role of exposure with farms. And so they have been doing tracking studies to understand, where fish go and their migratory behavior, but they've never been able to link physiology and disease and those kinds of aspects to those tracking studies, because our program focuses on non-lethal detection of infection and stress. We're able to carry out these kind of studies on populations of fish that are of conservation concern without mortality to those fish. And so that's where I think Canada is absolutely ahead of the game, not only because of my research, but the work that I do with universities that are really leading the charge when it comes to the tracking studies. This is a game changer, to be able to actually study these processes in a non-lethal way. It's like taking a saliva test in a human.
And is this new, doctor? Is this something
It's
recent?
Completely new, yes.
Okay.
Our first publication on merging tracking studies with non-lethal physiological samplings came in the science paper that I published back in 2011. That was the very first time that this kind of technology had been utilized. Our technology has evolved a lot since then, and our genomic technology is much more targeted to specific signatures of stress and disease. So it's a lot more powerful than what we had back in 2011. And it's going to be a game changer in terms of.
And have you got more ability today, or going forward to focus on that level of research?
I certainly hope so. I do have some funding from Pacific Salmon Foundation to continue in that level of research. I know that the Pacific Salmon Strategy, has a placeholder for that kind of work, but whether or not that work actually gets funded, I don't know yet.
But you would feel it's important to fund that level of scientific research. Very important.
Well, it's a bit self-serving for me to say so, but yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, it seems extremely important. Could you comment in the answer to one of my colleagues' earlier questions? You referenced advice that the minister may want to pause something as it relates to fish farming in, I forget the sensitive area on the Pacific coast. Could you expand a bit on why you stated that?
I believe the question to me was if the minister suggested that that there was no more than a minimal risk, and that therefore, reverse the decision about the farms in the Discovery Islands, what I would have to say about that. And my response was that since the CSASs were done, not very long ago, but since they were concluded, we have new data. And before we holistically make a decision about the level of threat that farms have towards our wild populations, we really do need to look carefully at that data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Mr. Blanchet-Janka for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question will start with Ms. Miller-Saunders, but I would like to hear from the other witnesses if we have time. our study on Pacific salmon is going to end soon, and I would like to know what you think are the main steps that need to be taken to conserve salmon. What is the most urgent thing that needs to be done?
I think that we need to get away from the idea that simply pumping out more fish from hatcheries is going to reverse the declines. I think that we need to recognize that the marine environment is where the year class strength for many of these populations is determined, which means that the marine environment is where we need to consider taking the most action. I think that having marked selective fisheries for hatchery fish would mean that we would have less fishing pressure on our wild fish, so that if there are enough fish to be exploited, that the exploited fish are not our wild stocks. And I think that we need to employ the newest technologies that we can to understand the synergistic and cumulative effects of different kinds of stressors and diseases, and as well as the role of prey availability and predator impacts to make informed decisions that are informed by models to identify the factors that we can modify anthropogenically to turn things around. So I know that there's a lot of concentration on pinnipeds. My lab actually did some of the work on pinnipeds. The molecular work supporting the diet work was done in my lab. And there are many scientists within DFO who have questions about the numbers that have been generated in terms of the impacts on salmon, because a lot of the early studies were focusing mostly on pinnipeds that were feeding in estuaries, but the vast majority of the pinniped population is not feeding in estuaries. So if you can extrapolate what you see in terms of the numbers of salmon that are being consumed in an estuary compared to what is being consumed in all of southern BC, those numbers may not match up. So I think that we need to be careful. I think that there is a potential that we're looking for the one thing we can control to blame, and I am concerned that we may be misguided in that particular decision.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard-Janka. We'll now go to Mr. Johns to finish up for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reid, in terms of the government's commitment to reconciliation, case law, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, my question is, will the government will you enact the government to government relationship? Will that be actioned in the creation of the Pacific Salmon Secretariat and the Restoration Center of Expertise?
So we haven't had a chance to consult with Indigenous groups yet on what the governance looks like, but we fully intend to work with them as partners. That needs to be developed based on their own ideas and interests, and those discussions need to take place. Thank you for the question.
Okay. Ms. Miller-Saunders, I agree with Mr. Morrissey. We sure hope that you get the resources you need to continue your important work. My question is, if the minister approves the transfer of farm fish into the Discovery Islands, should they be screened for Tenacibaculum, given the low returns? And can you also maybe talk a little bit or explain how is the effect of natural occurring viruses different than viruses coming from fish farms?
Well, a lot of viruses coming from fish farms are also naturally occurring, so we have to be careful to think that they're two completely separate things. In terms of your, I'm sorry, I've just lost track of what your question was.
It's back to the, if the minister approves the transfer of, farm fish back into the Discovery Islands.
Oh, the Tenacibaculum. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Tenacibaculum is not going to be an easy one to control, because Tenacibaculum is found in marine fish as well as salmon, as well as farm fish. So it isn't only found in farm salmon. The issue with farm salmon is it may be considerably increased in terms of the abundance of Tenacibaculum released into the water column. And certainly the early eDNA studies or environmental DNA studies show that Tenacibaculum is concentrated around farms. I think that we do need to look again at treatment effects and what we can do in terms of decreasing the loads of that particular bacteria on those farms. As well as, our data actually do show that we're seeing tenacibaculum present in farm fish before they've moved them out into the ocean, so that likely when they're introducing salt water into the hatcheries, they're already introducing that bacterium into their fish. The easiest way to control, maybe it may not be easy, but if the water going into a farm and the water exiting a farm was all filtered, like in closed containment systems or systems on land, we wouldn't have any of these problems because sea lice wouldn't infect farm fish because sea lice would be filtered out of the water column, and therefore they wouldn't affect our wild fish as well. You could do that with a lot of things like tenacibaculum. Viruses will be harder, but the fact of the matter is, if farm fish were less stressed, if they weren't stressed by sea lice and all the treatments and everything associated with them, they wouldn't have the same potential to develop disease. Disease wouldn't ensue to the same degree if we can control what comes in and what goes out of farms.
Thank you, Mr. Jans. And that expires all our time for today's committee meeting. I want to say a big thank you for departmental officials for appearing before committee today. And I agree with statements by the committee members that it's been probably one of the most informative meetings we've had on this subject for quite some time. So thank you to everybody for playing their part in providing the committee with that valuable information. Remind everybody that we're back again on Wednesday. Big thank you to clerks, analysts, and our translation people, and wish everybody a good evening, and we'll see you all Wednesday evening. Good night.